Welcome to Ethoria Channel.
The more you give, the less they see you. Until you stop. And then, they panic. Silence, withdrawal, inaccessibility. They're not passivity. They are the language of power. Because the world has been taught to measure your worth by your availability. When you react to everything, you become predictable. When you're there for everyone, you become no one. Even though no one ever told you this directly, you learned that you must always be present, to respond, to explain, to justify. Why? Because as a child you learned that love came with conditions. That being available meant being accepted, and silence meant punishment. That's why today when you don't respond immediately you feel guilt, as if you owe someone something. But the truth is, the more you give without limits, the less of yourself remains. Being too available isn't a virtue, it's a wound. It's trauma disguised as kindness. And as long as you don't look back, you'll keep offering yourself to a world that doesn't know how to receive. That's not your duty, that's your pattern. And patterns aren't to be fixed, but transcended. Jung spoke about the energy of the psyche, about how every impulse, every reaction, every emotion drains your strength. But strength is not infinite. So the real question is not how much you give, but to whom and why. When you respond to every message, every glance, every twinge of guilt, you deplete yourself. Not physically, energetically. And that's when you become easy prey. Those who manipulate don't seek your strength. They seek your weakness. And when you're always available, always present, you show exactly what they will exploit. Jung said, "What you resist persists." And you were taught to resist solitude, silence, and boundaries. So you keep falling into the same patterns and call it bad luck. But that's not misfortune. It's energy that doesn't know how to choose, and energy without boundaries becomes an invitation for parasites. So next time you feel the urge to reply, explain, rescue, pause, and ask yourself, am I doing this out of love or out of fear of being rejected? Because the difference between the two is the difference between freedom and chains. You don't need to be available to be worthy. You don't need to reply to be present. Your absence from chaos is sometimes your clearest response. Because a boundary is not a wall, it's a mirror. Those who respect you will see themselves in it. Those who use you will try to break it. And when the mirror holds, it transforms, not to protect you from others, but to finally let them see themselves. Because your silence no longer hides your weakness, it reveals theirs. And when they can no longer shape your reactions, they are left facing themselves. And that is the breaking point. Not because you disappeared, but because you became clear, and you no longer carry their expectations. You no longer bear the guilt they placed in your hands. You don't react. You don't explain. You don't lose your strength. Because you've realized it's not your responsibility to fix someone else's wounds. Your presence is no longer up for grabs. Your words are no longer free. Your boundaries are now fire, not walls. Because they warm your soul, not freeze others. And while others try to decode your peace, you finally rest in a silence that doesn't ask for permission to exist. This is not the end of your availability. It's the transformation of your presence. You no longer show up to be accepted, but to remain whole. You don't avoid people because you're cold, but because you know when presence is a betrayal of self. You're not silent out of withdrawal, but because you no longer need to be understood to be complete. You no longer help everyone because you've learned to protect yourself first. Your peace is no longer a compromise, it's a choice, and you no longer seek permission to exist. You show up only where your soul doesn't have to split itself to be accepted. And now, as you walk through that gate, you no longer carry the burden of being everything to everyone. You no longer seek to be needed, but to be whole. You don't leave them out of spite, but out of self-respect. And in that silence, you finally hear yourself. Not the world that screams, not the past that calls, but you, who no longer needs to bend to anyone's projection. And maybe for the first time, you don't look back to see who's following, not because you're angry, but because you no longer measure your worth by footsteps behind you. In this walk with no return, you carry no weight of explanations, no waiting, only the light ahead and your whole self. You no longer need to prove yourself. You no longer need to explain. The doors you once kept wide open now require a gentle knock, not to shut the world out, but to teach it reverence. A world that failed to value your availability must now learn how to approach softly, without noise. Because your silence now has a price, not out of revenge, but out of dignity, because you finally remembered you are present to yourself, and that is enough. You no longer need to seek yourself in other people's eyes, because you no longer come to be found, but to affirm what you've already become. Your presence is no longer a request, it's a reflection. In silence, you heard your name for the first time, without needing anyone to say it. And for the first time, you didn't feel alone. Because what you spent a lifetime searching for in others now quietly lives in you. No drama, no questions, no doubt. Just peace that no longer needs explanation. This is not the end, this is the return. Not to the world as it was, but to you as you've become. And when someone knocks again, you won't run. Because now you know, those who can't stand silently in your silence have no place near your presence. You no longer seek a role in someone else's story. Because your silence writes a new one, not loud, not for proof, but one that endures, where you are not a supplement, but a source. If they ask where you disappeared to, say, I returned. Not to the noise, but to the center. Because sometimes, to be free, you must first be unavailable. Not to everyone, but to everything that takes you away from yourself. And only then do you stop being a reaction and become the source. Those who loved you only when you were quiet enough to listen won't understand your silence now. But you're not here to be understood. You're here to remember that your yes carries weight, that your no carries light. Because the end of your availability is not your extremity. It is the beginning of your wholeness. And now, you walk with a peace that needs no witness, a strength that doesn't shout, a love that no longer bends to be received, but simply radiates. You are no longer available because you are finally here. Now you do not walk to find yourself. You walk because you know who you are, with no need to be seen, heard, or validated. Because you no longer seek to return to yourself. You live from yourself. And in every step you carry silence, not as a shield, but as truth. Because now you know, you no longer need to return when you're no longer running. Not from yourself, not from the silence, but moving forward as someone who seeks nothing, yet carries everything. Silence is no longer your defense, it is your devotion. And where words cannot reach, your peace will speak. Not for everyone, but for you. And that is enough. But no, this won't be easy. Because to become your true self, you'll have to lose some people. Some won't understand your silence. Some will turn away, confused that you're no longer there to soothe, save, or validate them. But that doesn't mean you're wrong. It means you're on the path. Because your truth won't please everyone. But to those who stay, you won't need to prove anything anymore. Only to be. And now I ask you, who were you when you still said yes to everyone? Who did you become when you learned to be silent? What did you lose when you stopped being available to all? And what did you find in the silence you once feared? Write it in the comments, not to be understood, but to help someone recognize themselves in their own silence. Because maybe your voice awakens someone else's quiet. Retry Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.